Just put this down. All right, folks, thank you for your patience. And as technology sometimes have a mind of its own. If you joined before I was kicked off, again, my name is Demarcus Merritt. I'm a assistant director for Residence Life here at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I've been here since January 2017. Prior to that service, I was at the University of Florida for 4 years. Here today, I join you as a capacity of with the program committee and with the freeform subcommittee. Again, this platform is made accessible at least once a month since August 2017. And our attempt is to provide professional development sessions in order for us to talk about the different things under the housing and residence life umbrella, from facilities, assignments, social justice, and different things of that nature. So we can continue the learning throughout in and around SEAHO conference, just coming off our 2018 conference, which had a great time. Hope if you were not able to make it, definitely I encourage folks to reach out to those who are able to attend, and hopefully they have some notes and things to share about that experience. Today we're going to talk about completing the circle for the 4 A's of assessment. And this will not be an in-depth discussion about the matrix of assessment, as there's a lot of tools and a lot of pieces to assessment depending on what you're looking for. But this will talk mainly about some things that, from talking to colleagues and from looking at assessment practices that I've been involved in throughout my career, of things that typically are missed or not thought about when either composing how your assessment want to unfold or when you're looking at the data. So, as webinar attendees, you will learn and share best practices around the various components of assessment for residential housing, educational programs, products, and respective services that we may offer. You also learn information focused on the circles of assessing services or products, analyzing assessed data, application of analyzed data, and the analyzation of data-driven impacted service or product. So those are your 4 A's: assessing, analyzing, application, and analyzation. Webinar attendees will learn strategies for the critical need for debunking mythical monsters, factoring effective buy-in for productive output, assessment transparency, and other means to completing the cycle of assessment. So when we talk about, I think step 1, what we wanted to share today was the debunking of mythical monsters. I know personally for myself, when I used to hear the word assessment, I was just like, "Ooh, I don't want to do it. I didn't think I was qualified." I used to think that assessment was all just numbers and formulas and, looking at that information and mass and pages and pages and pages of information until my head hurt. So I really had a negative connotation about what assessment stood for, what it meant, and what was its role. Also, I've been in a very privileged position that typically the housing positions I've been in, I have not had to been the sole person or sole responsibility to produce the assessment data that our department stands on and produces curriculum around, and also dictates the other functional operations that we may offer. So I think I kind of put assessment in the back seat. So we want to kind of put it back in the driver's seat and get more folks around the table and help debunk the myth. It's not, assessment is not a mythical monster. Assessment is not a monster, and assessment is also not a mythical monster. So these are some of the things that we approach our staff here at UNCG, came in with that approach. One of the things that I'll mention later in the presentation is including assessment in your training, whether that's pro staff or your undergraduate staff or even your graduate staff. Of having that intentional conversation and space carved out really goes a long ways to getting everybody on board with the role of assessment in your department. You want to make sure in helping debunk the myth around assessment, assess your team members' knowledge, perspective, and previous experience with various components of assessment before issuing an assessment. Sometimes I've seen assessment be issued, and as a hall director, I saw my role as, okay, I I send the link out to my residents. I have those conversations with residents, make sure they're as many as possible completing the assessment that we're asking our residents or asking our staff to do. So I felt like I had a very singular role and that was my role. I knew that was it. And it started and it stopped in a certain place. But what I had to understand and what we've tried to do here is figure out what people's experiences are, because that is the starting point. If you have a number of staff that are operating from different viewpoints on how they view assessment, especially if they're operating from a fearful position, as I was, or from a lack of clarity position when it comes to assessment, that is going to dictate how well they are invested in helping that assessment be carried out, and as well as analyzing that data. So making sure that you are assessing that knowledge, figure out why people are scared. People may have had a bad experience, or people may have no experience, and maybe that's what the fear may be built off of. Breaking down assessment to even asking, how does everybody in your department define assessment, particularly those who are involved on the process of carrying out assessment. It is important to ask them these questions and ask them, quite frankly, in an open space so everybody can kind of hear each other's perspective and lens, and not for judgment, but for clarity. So if everybody's on a different page, but the department has a different role or different definition for how assessment is supposed to play out in the department, we need to come to an understanding. So I know if I'm standing on this side and I need to come to the other side to be more aligned with what the department is asking me regarding assessment, then I know where I need to go, and I know where I am in regards to where the assessment plays in our department. Make sure this involves all team members that play any role or any form of creating assessment, analyzing the assessment data, or implementing the assessment data-driven focuses. This has been an incredible, helpful buy-in, and staff, as I mentioned earlier, has already shown to yield higher effectiveness when it comes to output of data security. Think about peer review assessment tactics. For those that are involved, how are they reviewing each other's materials, or as the data is coming in, whose responsibility is that in order to review and pull out different things, as we'll talk further about that later in the presentation. When you think about assessment, when I kind of go back to what I was mentioning before, I was very fearful of what it is, and my fear came from, really, quite frankly, I was not educated to the point of how assessment fit within my residence life role. And I had to make sure I had to take personal responsibility on making sure I sought out either reading resources, or I sought out different things for me to be able to secure and increase my knowledge base around assessment. But I also held the department accountable as well, as what kind of spaces were they creating in order for me to be more informed about assessment and how it fits. I like to think when assessment can be a box of blank checks that can go uncashed. Explaining that assessment happens in large and small scale formats. So you want to think about how your assessment happens. Quite frankly, a lot of us do assessment informally, whether it's pre and post programs, or having assessment, a SWOT analysis after a particular project. So what happens, and it may just be named or referred to differently by different folks in the department, but it is important to have that conversation so we can know where everyone is. When you're thinking about assessment, try to make it fun and think about how assessment exercises can be team builders. What I'll talk about later in this presentation as well is how do we normalize assessment. It is important that the more it's talked about, the more it becomes embedded in a part of the culture of your department or the culture of your office. So I shifted from assessment being a mind state of fear to actually becoming a fire, because I was interested in what the assessment was able to do for us when it came to our services, and what information it was able to tell us on areas of improvement that we needed to really focus on and make sure that we paid attention to. Consider appointing a personal committee designated to assessment. This will allow for a centralized commitment to assessment efforts. We have a wonderful colleague, Maggie Gillespie, who assessment is her jam. And she is wonderful at it. You would think she was, born born into that area of the profession, but it's because she's dedicated, and I think she understands holistically of what role it plays with our department. So she really puts her all in, and she also makes sure she exposes herself to other learning tools and learning spaces to increase her knowledge base as well, which is important. But centralizing that information on that commitment has also allowed our staff to have somebody that they go to when they have questions, instead of kind of standing around and trying to figure it out or being frustrated with the whole fear or the complexity of assessment. They have her to go to, and they have been very intentional conversations about how assessment is, the different assessment projects that they've been assigned individually. It's something new that we've tried this year, having each one of our coordinators for residence life, which is transferable as a hall director, entry-level professionals. Everyone is responsible for an individual assessment project. And it could be on programming, it could be on a community service initiative doing, but it has to be something that they are particularly involved in, that they can assess and be able to draw conclusions from. So it's been a wonderful opportunity. Also, I think it puts our staff members in a position to have a very strong skill set when it comes to assessment. So step 2, you want to think about effective buy-in. Yields is greater or equal to, if you think about formulas, is greater than or equal to effective output. So when you're thinking about effective buy-in, one of the things I like to think about is, I've seen times where assessment comes out and I'm just asked to do it. I don't have any background information. I don't know why we're doing it. All I know is I need to compose an email, include the link, and then have those conversations with students, trying to make sure as many as possible complete it. But based on the information you should secure from assessing the team members' knowledge and experience, hopefully you're able to draw some conclusions and say, okay, here we go, and here's what we need to do to create that buy-in with our staff members. So now it's not work, right? So now it becomes this is a part of our role, and this is a part of our culture, and this is what we need to make sure that we are on board with it. And there's reduction of resistance to the whole thought and the whole operation and the role that assessment may play in your office. Again, I have to bring up Maggie. One thing that she shared, and I'll quote her, is assessment is more than a concept. It is a culture. So talking about with our staff about that, how can we make assessment a part of our culture and going forward? And assessment is really key, because it really, not only does it provide validation to the services that we do and what we provide our students, the campus and community, but it also provides that skill set to the staff member in order to be able to go through the different steps to pull data, to analyze the data, to be able to find common themes and that kind of thing. But the assistance and the education may be needed. So being able, after you assess them, and being able to say, okay, well, we need to provide a training, or we need to bring in someone from another office that is an expert or value leader when it comes to assessment, and have them exposed to our staff members in order to help them, help them grasp the concept of assessment. You can determine, you can determine what level of buy-in you will need with each team member based on those facts as well. Providing assessment training. One of the things that we did here, which I thought was very unique because it was the first time I've seen it when the assessment was talked about, was we have a Office of Assessment here at UNC Greensboro. And our pro-staff training committee scheduled them as a part of our training. So what that did for our staff, when I looked at and reflected on that space, is because our training, it was first part of our training. So that set the tone of, here's the year that we're about to have. Here's the type of commitment, elevated commitment that we're going to have when it comes to assessment. And what that professional did, and I learned a lot, especially being a new professional, what the office did, how did they function. Some of the things that we were looking to do our own assessment for, they already did it. So we didn't have to reproduce that effort. We just need to partner with them in order to, how do we request assessment from you? What types of assessment could we request? Our staff were also able to ask questions like, how does assessment work? Which was very beneficial because the professional colleague that came in was very patient, was understanding, like, she understood that people had fears about assessment or preconceived stereotypes about what assessment really was. And she really broke her role down and broke how assessment also helps the university as a whole, and how we could request that information from them, and also even going to the limit of showing us when the request comes through, what are the steps as far as getting that information and being able to pull that data from a set box of information, or a set group of information. So that was very big kudos to our committee for doing that, because like I said, as we assign each one of our coordinators a individual task to have their own individual assessment in order to complement the assessment that we have for all year. That was a strong foundation for them to start. And they were able to leave that space with questions. I think a lot of them left with a better clarity of what it is, what assessment is, also what their role was. They were able to make that space, utilize that space to also start crafting out what type of assessment, start answering some of those questions that you need to answer before you start your actual assessment. Also think about that consistency is key. Consider having assessment training throughout the year. So one of the things that we did not do, or we're looking to do in the upcoming training this summer, is bringing that person back in. Having additional training throughout the semester, or having different opportunities, making it a part of our meetings of how assessment plays out in other parts of the department, or giving time and space in my staff meetings to talk about assessment, answer questions. Sometimes it's easy to assume that, okay, people got it. You have a master's degree, or you have a bachelor's degree, or you have a certain level of education and experience, but always checking, making sure that that clarification is there, knowing that what expectations have been made of them. As I said, we use our campus partner out of Office of Assessment. But if you don't have that office, just check to see if someone is on your campus that may be an expert. It may be somebody in your department that particularly does assessment and can facilitate this type of training. So step 3, you want to look at completing the cycle of assessment. And before we go into it, there's some diagrams that I want to show that really help me understand not only that there are various types of assessment that you can do, but it also showed me that the different steps that you need to consider when doing it. So I'll show these and then we'll talk about a little bit. So those are 2 different assessment cycle variations that are pretty. The one on the right is pretty straight and to the point. It's actually pulled from a teacher curriculum that I found, but I think it's very applicable to what we do in our residence life field, because it allows you to, especially with the key about reflecting, which is often a step that I think we miss in our roles in how assessment plays out. You also want to think about the types of assessment that there are. There are different types out there, from diagnostic to formative to summative. And there are, if you Google search, or if you have those conversations, there are a lot more out there. And I think it's intentional to ask those questions before you start to formulate what your assessment is going to be, so you can try to get your best results in what you're looking to do. But these are 3 types that I typically use when I'm doing assessment, whether it's informal or formal, but these are something to keep in mind. And then in addition to looking at what types of assessment, you want to look at your tools. We'll briefly touch on in the next couple of slides. Observation, anecdotal records, checklists, rating scales and rubrics, portfolios, speaking and listening, interview conferences, projects, presentation, quizzes, tests, and examinations. One of the things I will say is, when I looked at this, it's almost could be a training series within itself, and really to help break down assessment depending on what role it plays in your department. I know I look to, in my future staff meetings, I will be using some of the assessment tools as hot topics that I start my meetings off with. So we can talk about it and just increase our general knowledge about how assessment is and what assessment is and how it fits into our roles. Okay, now on to the dialogue, completing the cycle of assessment. You want to be very intentional after you've gotten the information on where folks are, but those who are at the table or those who are going to be impacted by your assessment, those who are going to be involved in any aspect. Once you find out where they are, these are some critical questions that should be asked before you, as you start composing. Okay, this is what the type of assessment that we're looking to do, and this is how we're going to put it together going forward. What is your target result? For example, you may want to determine how many upperclassmen students remain on campus during the weekends. Think about what is your target audience. In this case, it would be on-campus students in upperclassmen halls. Think about a timeline. You want to look at a timeline, not only just for, okay, we're going to run this study for 4 months, but you want to also be intentional in including, okay, this is when the assessment is going to go out. This is when it's going to be created. This is when it's going to go out. This is how long that we want to give folks to take it. This is when we're looking to get the results back. A period for analyzing the results, a period for finding things and looking at, well, how can we make this impact our services or products, and then which we'll talk about is about how do you implement those changes based on the data that you achieved. What is the assessment method? So obviously there are different range of ways that you can secure your information: observatories, surveys, focus groups. What is the use for the results? To help determine when it's most beneficial to implement programming and times for times and location. That should be locations, not times twice. But you want to think about these things, and not only think about them, these are things you want to share. You want to share with the staff. This is why we're doing this. This is what we're looking to do. I think oftentimes my frustration with assessment has been, I feel like I'm just facilitating, passing on the email, and I don't know why we're doing this. You want to think, why is the data important? This will help determine if the weekend program has low or high attendance, who is needed to start, who is needed to do this, who is needed to complete this, how will results be shared via RA training. Assessment should teach, measure, reflect, and plan and improve. It can be short, mid, long term. Assessment can be a singular study, comparative study, or ongoing comparative study. Means you have results from this year or this phrase, these 3 months, and you compare it with another 3 months based on a similar activity or similar projects. So I want to make sure I stay conscious of time because this is a timed presentation. Here's some other things you want to consider. What I want to highlight, in addition to what I shared in the previous slide, is you want to identify gaps in those things, because that's going to be your meat and potatoes to figure out, okay, we did this, we offered this service this way, and this is how we need to change it or upgrade it. You want to see how does the data that you achieved, how does that affect your mission or your goals for the residential year? You also want to design learning activities that will help reinforce what these new learning outcomes and what the new focus is. Again, share with your staff, students, and campus. That is, if you remember anything, one of the things that I think is missing often is sharing your progress or sharing your results. Even if it's not what you found, it is still a progress because the assessment has been completed. But make sure you share it with staff. It's like, hey, we noticed that we have 50% less students, on the weekends in the month of February, and then finding out why. Share that information and figure out, so now in the month of February for the upcoming year, we can plan accordingly and make sure we're staying sustainable of our resources, financial and physical. Implement findings to be reflective and make sure you measure the impact. And then, as I mentioned before, consider repeating for comparative analysis. Again, that share and compare is important. As some examples here, one of the things that I think is a major tool for us, and actually we use it in our recruitment efforts with candidates, but we also use it as topics of discussion throughout the year, is our assessment practices and how we this is also published to our Housing and Residence Life website, but it's telling you, from year to year, what are we doing? What are we not doing well? We don't shy away from things that we're not doing well because we want the information known that, hey, we recognize that we're not doing this well, and here's what we're going to work on. Here's how we're going to work on it. I think students really appreciate that, especially for having them investing in a paid experience for their on-campus life with us. Again, you'll see some key information. One of the things that I really focus on is our assessment process. I'll make sure we'll have some more time, give you all, I'll send this information out so you can comb through this information. If you have any questions about how we compose this, we have a committee. Again, Maggie is our main person on the residential life side, but our marketing folks are involved, our facility folks are involved. There's a lot of people at the table to make this happen. Also, I think it's important, especially for our students, when they look at this document, they can see what our assessment cycle is. So where we're sending out emails and we're conducting various surveys throughout the year, they understand where this fits in order for us to improve our services when it comes to them. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to conclude this presentation now. But before I do, because I do want to leave some space for people to share or ask questions, we have about 5 minutes remaining. If you have not completed your SEAHO member needs assessment, please make sure your voice is valued. SEAHO.org. It is midway of the SEAHO web page. It doesn't take that long, but it is very important information, especially not only for the SEAHO 2018 conference, but for future conferences and also for the overall operation of our organization.